How much does a new apartment in Warsaw cost in 2026? In which district and for what price can we buy this new apartment right now? How much money in dollars do we need to buy a really good investment property, meaning in those areas that are expected to grow? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Today's episode is the kind you've probably gotten used to over the past few years. This is the episode we always do in January of the new year to show how prices have changed over the previous year, what the current situation is, and of course, to discuss the strategies and investment approaches that will be relevant in the current year, 2026. But before we get started, of course, let me introduce myself. My name is 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤, and I am the head of MDV Group. We specialize exclusively in investment real estate in Warsaw, and not just Warsaw, but throughout all of Poland. If you're interested in the topic of investing, I invite you to join us on our Telegram channel, where we not only post interesting articles, but also share all sorts of breakdowns with numbers, so that future, current, and even experienced investors can understand whether it's worth investing in the Polish market and where it's best to invest in our current situation. And let's start with the data we've gathered so far, as of today. These are the figures on how the market grew in 2025. Why do I want to focus on this for a bit? Would you like to hear about this in more detail? The thing is, throughout the entire year of 2025, the Polish real estate market was heavily marked by the fact that all the experts and all the sellers were in a noticeably somber and depressed state of mind about the current condition of our market, because we all collectively felt deep down that something was definitely off with the market. Many experts predicted that by the end of the year, the market would show negative growth, that the market was stagnating, and so on and so forth. But right in front of my eyes, and yours, we have data that clearly shows that we didn't experience any downturn or rollback. We have stagnation. I want to draw your attention to the fact that this is normal growth, normal percentages. The normal annual growth rate for the market in Poland, specifically the new construction market, is 6%. According to statistical data, which all of us working experts in this market generally trust, and this data shows us that the annual growth was 4%. Yes, that's not 6%, not the standard 6% growth. It's only 4%. But that's still significant. It's not stagnation. It's not a rollback of that level. You can't say the same about the secondary real estate market, because throughout 2025, we saw the market in turmoil, prices dropping, people dumping their apartments. How many apartments were sold off? Basically for next to nothing, for one reason or another, because people urgently and quickly needed money. But since the fundamental primary residential real estate market is typically not influenced or governed by such sudden and highly reactive emotional investment decisions made and executed by ordinary people every day, after all, it's a market of companies, big developers, so everything was calm here. And since there weren't any sudden or rash decisions, the market is showing steady growth. Yes, I can say that we too, our companies and our specialists, were also concerned that the apartments that were bought in 2024, in 2023, with completion scheduled for 2025, that by the end, these apartments wouldn't have increased in value as much, let's say in a speculative sense. And let me remind you what we call a speculative story. It's when you buy at the foundation stage and sell without doing any renovations after construction is finished, after receiving the keys and the property rights. And until quite recently, all the flippers who were flipping new builds were making good money on it, because by investing at the foundation stage and waiting 2 years for construction, people were consistently earning 12% or more, basically doing nothing, and afterwards not doing anything else with that investment. And looking ahead, I'd like to tell you something I often say to clients who come for individual consultations. Unfortunately, the era has ended on the Polish market. The era of quick speculative flipping of new builds. Now, just like with regular flipping, you need to invest some of your own money and time to upgrade the apartment, and only after that can you sell it. These kinds of apartments sell quickly, and their added value increases significantly. You definitely need to take advantage of this. This doesn't mean it's impossible to make money on new builds. You definitely can. You just need to approach it smartly, not just sit around waiting for prices to go up on their own. The market has changed. Things won't just grow on their own anymore. If we go back to the table, the chart, I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that the average price per square meter in Warsaw right now is 18,419 zlotys. Of course, that doesn't mean it's the same everywhere in Warsaw. Prices start at 11,000 and go up to 50,000 and even higher. That's for 𝐋𝐢𝐳𝐤. It's just an average price, so if someone was coming to the Warsaw market for the first time and asked, how much do 10 apartments cost here? You could easily multiply the square footage by 18,500 per square meter. Let's move on. So here's a chart that shows us the average price per square meter as of today. That is, at the beginning of 2026, this is the price per square meter when buying a studio apartment. A studio apartment, if anyone doesn't know, let me explain, is a type of open plan apartment. Right now, a lot of them are being built all over the world. They're basically boxes. Small boxes. In Poland, anything from 25 square meters is already considered an apartment. Anything smaller than that is classified as commercial space. We have these kinds of restrictions. That's why, on average, when we do calculations, we usually use 27 square meters, so people can understand how much on average and in which area such a studio apartment might cost. If we talk about the growth of the studio apartment market, specifically in new buildings, then in 2025, the price of such studios increased by 7%. I think that's a pretty good indicator. And on average, the price per square meter for such a studio in Warsaw is 22,998 zlotys. Let's immediately take a look at which district has the most expensive and which has the cheapest ones. And let's estimate how much a studio would cost in each district if it were 27 square meters. So the most expensive studio we can buy, I'll immediately give the price in dollars to make it easier. So the most expensive studio we could buy would naturally be in 𝐿𝐴. And there, it would cost $292,000. And the cheapest studio would be on 𝐵iałęka. Of course, 𝐵iałęka is a very large district, and it has a huge number of sub-districts and neighborhoods. But if we take it as a whole, the entire big 𝐵iałęka, then on average there, such a studio would cost us $100,000. Look, not so long ago, a studio apartment was considered a pretty good investment because it was easy to rent out short-term and because it was much cheaper compared to other sizes for entry. And often people bought them as investments. Such studios were bought specifically in 𝐻𝐻𝐳, Wola, Żoliborz, and Lower Mokotów and rented out short-term. If you watched our previous video, then I'm sure you already know that this kind of easy money is coming to an end for us this year. It's ending because Poland finally has also caught up with this trend, namely the regulation of short-term rentals. And that means you won't be able to rent out your studio just anywhere. If you already own a studio apartment and are renting it out, right? Then whether you'll be able to keep renting it out or not, well, I think that, first of all, you'll be notified about it pretty quickly by Booking.com, because both it and Airbnb are tightly linked to these new regulations. But for now, there aren't any specifics yet. No one knows anything concrete at all because this bill is still being developed. We're only getting bits and pieces, like a new thing they've come up with or something they've upgraded specifically for Poland. But no one has seen the final version yet. So we're waiting roughly until April, and then it should become clear what's what. So as of today, if you haven't bought a studio apartment yet, especially if you're planning to rent it out short term, I'd really advise you to think carefully about whether it's worth doing. But if you do decide that yes, you need to buy, then you should take the choice of building where you'll make this investment very seriously. so that you don't end up in a situation where the building's local management decides that in this particular building, the Residents Association has banned short-term rentals. And it turns out you buy the place, but then it's impossible to rent it out. So please be extremely careful. Let's move on. A two-room apartment is the most liquid investment format in real estate in general, whether it's Polish or any other, just as an investment. So what has been happening in this market, first of all? This market over the past year has not grown at all. I mean, specifically two-room apartments. I don't know what this is connected to. I tried to analyze it, and honestly, I couldn't figure it out. Why? But I suppose that maybe as of 2025, it's about the supply on the market. Specifically, there were so many two-room apartments that developers were dumping prices on them. That's what I think. That's exactly why the statistics show zero growth for the whole year. And yes, that's not very good. But on the other hand, it's already been a year and a half of stable. And a steady shift, a stable trend of people moving from two-room apartments to three-room apartments. This has been observed, if you remember, I mentioned this a year ago, but now I can say with 100% certainty, this is happening absolutely everywhere, both among expats, meaning immigrants living in Poland, and among the local population. There is a strong trend of people moving out of big cities, away from expensive apartments and high utility costs, to the suburbs, where either the utilities and apartment blocks are lower, they really are, significantly lower there, or to so-called no-maintenance fee apartments. These are apartments located in row houses, or in 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤 houses, where a 𝐵𝐋𝐢𝐬 is divided into 4 apartments, and there's no payment to a management company. Of course, the management company eats up a huge amount of money with their services. And it's not just services. In general, everything in Poland that involves human labor is a very expensive pleasure, especially since this year the minimum wage has changed again, the regional minimum, that is. So everything is moving toward the fact that it is becoming quite expensive for people to live and provide for themselves. This phenomenon explains exactly why there is currently a growing trend of many people deciding to move out of their current smaller apartments and into larger and more spacious ones. It's also unclear what this is connected to, but the trend seems to be gaining momentum. Even people who can easily afford higher utility bills are moving from smaller apartments to larger ones without any changes in their family status or having additional children, and so on. Right now, people seem to have a craving for more square footage. Well, maybe that's a good thing. That's probably why there were so many listings on the secondary real estate market, especially two-room apartments. They kind of overshadowed the primary real estate market. And if you can buy a renovated apartment on the secondary market for the price of an unrenovated one in the primary market, and you don't have to wait for it, then obviously the priority is clear. The advantage will be with secondary housing. That's why we're seeing this situation, and the price per square meter, which was almost 18,000 on average across all of Warsaw, is staying about the same. What should we expect in 2026? Most likely, just the usual growth, like we've seen in previous years, except for the year with the 2% mortgage. So gradually, two-room apartments will also start to pick up momentum. You can also see this in the types of investments that are coming onto the market now. Right now, investment layouts are being introduced. In these investments, it's mostly either small apartments, around 30, 33, or 35 square meters. Most likely, these are intended for long-term rentals, students, and so on. And then there are the larger 3- and 4-room apartments, which will have more square footage. So these are no longer two-room apartments. If you have the opportunity to buy for investment, it's better to buy a 3-room or even a 4-room apartment rather than a 2-room one. Let me clarify again. This doesn't mean you won't be able to make money, for example, by flipping it, or that you won't be able to earn by renting it out long term. Of course not. You'll definitely make money on this apartment. No problem. Everything will be fine. It's also convenient to rent out such apartments, and right now they are naturally on the same level as 3-room apartments. But right now we're talking specifically about reselling at the construction stage, bought at the foundation stage, sold later. So this year would have been a miss for those who bought a 2-room apartment. Let's move on and see in which areas we can buy a 2-room apartment and for how much. I recalculated for 44 square meters, and we can see that, as always, the most expensive apartment is the one with the widest space. And here, 44 square meters will cost us $476,000. And of course, the cheapest one we can buy is in 𝐵𝐵𝐿𝐵 for $164,400. $164,400. Just a few years ago, I used to say that you could buy a 3-room apartment for $100,000. And definitely not in 𝐵𝐵𝐿𝐵𝐿. That's how our prices have changed and the market has grown. It's even scary to talk about it. There you go. And based on these tables, this presentation will be available on our Telegram channel. I'll leave the link to it in the description. You can download this PDF and look through it in detail. Free 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤. If you need it, if you're interested. So you can basically understand how much money you need right now at the beginning of 2026 to get into these kinds of investments in new builds in Warsaw. These are prices not only for new builds that have already been completed or will be completed in the near future. These are the prices for all new builds. Once again, coming back to the topic of watching our videos, we've mentioned many times that the price per square meter in a new build, at least in Poland, doesn't depend on what the developer wants. It's not like they just decide, I want to raise the price per square meter in 3 months by this much. No, that's not how it works. Everything is regulated by the economy and the market. And of course by the availability of construction services and building materials. That's why you can assume that any new build today, no matter what stage you buy at, will cost within this price range. 3-room apartment. 3-room apartment, this is where the magic begins. 3-room apartments for 2025 have shown a standard growth of 6%. The standard 6% and the price per square meter, pay attention, is almost the same as the price per square meter of a 2-room apartment, with only a 500 zloty difference. The average price across all of Warsaw. There weren't that many 3-room apartments on the market for 2025, and the variety wasn't as great as it was for 2-room apartments. Probably, first of all, this affected the fact that the 3-room apartment market showed a standard 6% growth. And of course, what I mentioned just a few minutes ago also had an impact, the trend of changing the housing paradigm, I would say. The housing paradigm is the desire to move into a larger, more spacious home. That's why 3-room apartments today, just like a year ago, remain among the most liquid options for investment. Because with a 3-room apartment, you can get in at 54 square meters or at 70 square meters. And it's still a 3-room apartment, and it's just as attractive on the market. And there are no indicators suggesting that 3-room apartments will stop growing in 2026, just as they've shown growth over the past 2 years. Now, let's talk about how much the most expensive and the cheapest 3-room apartments in Warsaw will cost. So the most expensive 3-room apartment is, of course, in 𝐋𝐢𝐳𝐤. And the average price in 𝐶hród for new developments will be around 600 to 650,000 for a 60 square meter apartment. And the cheapest is in 𝐵𝐿𝐵𝐿. And here you'll already have to shell out $224,000. Look, I'm sure many of you have heard that 𝐶hród isn't as cheap as I just mentioned. Yes, of course, there are a lot of iconic properties. Some of them, for example, in Wola, are very expensive, starting from 50,000 per square meter and up. And the thing is, when these kinds of analyses are done, premium housing isn't included. That's a completely different level, a completely different type of investment. It's something else entirely. I wouldn't even call it the same. It's not just about money, but about investment strategies. So whenever any analyst calculates the average price in Warsaw or by district, these kinds of investments aren't included. Otherwise, our average price per square meter would skyrocket. So this kind of general picture where everything is blurred together and an average is calculated just isn't done. And that's the right approach. We have a clear understanding of how to enter a completely standard business class segment, let's call it that, or even the middle class, as I like to say, the mid class. And what kind of money do we need for that? So on average, you should be prepared for something around $300,000 to $350,000. That way, you'll have the flexibility to look at several districts, including Wilanów, Okotow, Praga, full-fledged Praga, and North Praga. Because right now, prices there are rising, and it's in high demand. So keep that in mind, please, and consider it. Don't write it off. Of course, the district isn't fully redeveloped yet, but we've all seen the plans that are set to be implemented by 2030, and they're actively being carried out. We can literally see with our own eyes how everything is changing. So don't miss out on a very attractive, very promising district. And wrapping up our little tour of new apartment prices in Warsaw, of course, are the 4-room and larger apartments. And here, it's not just magic anymore. This is the pattern we've been seeing for a long, long time. The increase in square footage in new builds, especially in larger apartments. 4-room apartments aren't always 200 square meters. On average, they start at around 80 square meters and up. And in 2025, the growth of such apartments on the market reached 8% annually. That's a very good indicator. It's actually a really, really good indicator. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that the price per square meter in a 4-room in a large apartment has already on average surpassed the price per square meter in both 2- and 3-room apartments. And as of today, at the beginning of 2026, the price per square meter in apartments with 4 or more rooms is 18,322 zlotys. That's a very good increase. That's a good price. Well, I think that in about a year, we'll see the price per square meter in a 4-room apartment be about the same as in a studio. By the way, that's not a joke at all. There's one investment that really surprised all of us, because in the summer of 2025, it hit the market and showed us exactly this situation. The price per square meter in a 4-room apartment, starting from 90 square meters, was exactly the same as the price per square meter for 32 square meters in the same development. That's the kind of miracle we're seeing. Developers, as they say, quickly changed their tune and figured out where and how they could make money. Speaking of prices, if you calculate at 18,000 per square meter, of course it's different everywhere, because in 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤 it's 39,000 zlotys per square meter. On 𝐵𝐿𝐿𝐿 it's 13,500 per square meter, and definitely not 11, like you could pay for a 2-room apartment, for example, on that same 𝐵𝐿𝐿𝐿. So in order to buy a property of 80 square meters in the most expensive and prestigious district of Warsaw, you would need to have at least $860,000 ready to go. On the other hand, in the cheapest and most budget-friendly district, it still costs almost $300,000 to buy that same 80 square meters. Now, I really want to touch on this specific question. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, you have $300,000 available and you want to buy a home somewhere in Warsaw, but you don't quite know whether it is better to buy, for example, a small 2-room apartment in 𝐶𝐢𝐴ZG or a much larger 4-room apartment, say in the district of 𝐵𝐿𝐿𝐿 or maybe in 𝐼𝐻𝑟𝑒𝑠. As of today, just like it was a year ago, and this is a very important point to keep in mind if you plan to resell the property later, I would strongly recommend choosing a larger home rather than a small apartment. But if you're planning on long-term rentals, then both options are absolutely equal. Whether you buy a 2-room apartment, rent it out long-term, and get a return of 3, 4, 5, or 6%, depending on the district, of course. Or if you buy in 𝐵𝐿𝐿𝐿, you'll get the same result. But if we're talking about buying at the foundation stage, renovating, and then selling, I would choose apartments that are larger in size rather than smaller, but located in areas closer to the city center. And to wrap up the topic of new apartment prices, we definitely need to talk about how garage and storage room prices have changed. Storage units, storage rooms, storage units, you can buy them, or you can choose not to. So the price of a storage unit today starts at 10,000 zlotys. At the same time, there are some paradoxes in more expensive developments compared to cheaper ones. For example, in a premium development, you might be able to get a storage unit for 10,000 zlotys, while in some peripheral development, the price per square meter of even a storage unit can be 7, and the whole storage unit will cost 15,000. So obviously, storage units can't be just 1 square meter. So on average, be prepared that even on the outskirts, they'll cost around 15,000. If we're talking about parking spaces, there are different types of parking. There are underground and above ground parking spaces, and underground ones come in 2 types. There are individual spots or dependent spots. That is, when a platform lifts and the car goes down, or the car is placed on the platform and lifted up. If we're talking about a separate spot in a garage, it starts at 35,000 zlotys per spot. Dependent spots cost about 30,000. If we're talking about spots in the city center, on average, they cost 200,000 zlotys per spot. Land in Warsaw is getting more expensive. Prices aren't going to drop. But there's some good news. The good news is that they've introduced changes, another amendment to our legislation. Developer legislation, of course. And now, in theory, we won't be required to buy a parking spot for ourselves if we don't want to. But I urge you, if you're buying an apartment as an investment, not a studio, but at least a 2-room apartment or bigger, then you absolutely need to plan on buying a parking spot. It's just a must. Why? Because in the future, you won't be able to sell or rent it out. You won't be able to do it properly. Why? Because there are parking restrictions, basically, on the streets of Warsaw. In other words, parking spaces are extremely limited, and they're often paid. So people will simply have problems. For example, if we're talking about a modern renter, their main requirement is that there must be a garage, and preferably heated, and ideally a spot near the entrance to their building. So please keep that in mind. And to wrap up today's episode, I'd like to sum things up by talking about the 4 main investment strategies that will be relevant in Poland from 2026 to 2029. These are the timeframes set by our local analysts, who are forecasting what will happen to the market, and consequently, what will happen to various real estate investment strategies. Let's start with long-term rentals. Long-term rentals are basically the flagship in Poland today. On the one hand, that's because our political leadership has turned in this direction. It's the same direction, the same flagship approach that Germany and other countries once adopted. In other words, it's a shift from private rentals to institutional leasing. So gradually, there's a shift from owning your own home to rental housing. In other words, it's a gradual transition from private ownership to renting, basically over the course of a lifetime. As investors, this is also very interesting to us because if we have the money and people will be renting from us later, then why not? Now is the time to invest in this. If we talk about demand, the demand for rentals follows exactly the same trend as the demand for buying. So 3 and 4 room apartments are the top priority. That's why if we're talking about buying for the long term, I'm saying this again now. And once again, let me repeat myself. If you have the option to buy a 3-room apartment in a bedroom community or a 2-room, say in 𝐿𝐴, you should go for the 3-room in the bedroom community. Simply because the trends show it. This isn't just our opinion or imagination. These are market trends that show it's more attractive there, and the ROI is higher. Why does this happen? Because naturally, our main tenants for these kinds of apartments nowadays, let's call them that, are family couples or expats and relocators. Family couples need a lot of space. And people coming from abroad who are used to larger living spaces also expect to live in spacious apartments here, not in tiny little rooms. That doesn't mean students have disappeared. No, they haven't. But there are serious options for small apartments. Right now, the main competitor is called investment leasing, or rather institutional leasing. Sorry, I misspoke. What is this all about? It's when a large developer, let's say, builds a big residential building. There are many apartments in it, and these apartments are rented out for long-term leases. The management company from this developer keeps things under control. They often keep prices low. Most often, these are two-room apartments with a very straightforward entry process, but it's very hard to leave. But at the same time, it's a B2B contract. In reality, it's B2C, or rather, yes, it's not C2C, but B2C, meaning the tenant signs a contract with the company. And here, a whole different set of circumstances comes into play. So keep that in mind. There will be competition here, competition specifically with these giants that are now entering the market, not just in Warsaw, but all over Poland. And this is only going to grow. This is precisely the reason why 3- and 4-room apartments today are considered to be a remarkably unique and rare offering, because in the current market of institutional rental properties, large apartments are frequently seen as a significant rarity rather than the established norm. As for rental rates, yes, 𝐼𝐼, when coming to power, talked about the possibility that they would someday be regulated by the government. As of today, the market is regulated in the usual way, by the market itself. We are seeing moderate growth, but still growth, not stagnation. In 2025, we saw rates decrease as usual during the off-season and increase during the peak season. There hasn't been a situation where, after the season, a huge number of apartments remained unrented. We haven't seen that. So the market is feeling completely stable. And if you're looking for passive income from long-term rentals, you can relax and confidently enter this market. And we keep earning, at least until our government comes up with another idea and changes something on us. Well, and if they do change things, we'll adapt too. We're like little cockroaches that way. Investors, they always know where to make more money. The next investment strategy I wanted to talk about is capital growth. So we buy something, we hold on to it for a while, maybe we rent it out, but not with the intention of always renting it or moving in later. We're just waiting for the market to go up. Like, for example, you buy an apartment, wait 5 or 6 years, right? So you can sell it without having to pay any income tax. So we just sit and wait, then get the capital and reinvest it. This strategy also has its place, but according to statistics, it really works with reselling 4-bedroom apartments and larger. In other words, they have a real advantage compared to other sizes. That doesn't mean everything else won't go up too. But as you saw today, for example, 2-bedroom apartments in new buildings, first and foremost, showed a denial of stagnation. So what will happen next with small apartments? We'll just have to wait and see. As of today, 3- and 4-bedroom apartments are really the thing. Now, short-term rentals. Short-term rentals have, to put it mildly, hit a dead end. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't invest here. In fact, it's very important to invest here. Just please don't invest in an apartment somewhere in downtown Warsaw, where you'll most likely face difficulties and restrictions on short-term rentals in the future. And if you want to do short-term rentals and earn income from it. If, for example, you're a big investor, then you should consider building a small apart hotel somewhere nearby. Near Warsaw, hand it over to a management company and make great money from short-term rentals. If you're a small investor, then you should consider buying, for example, a unit in an existing apart hotel where there's already a management company that will pay you a regular percentage from renting out your apartment or your hotel room. Yes, that's still around, and we're making money from it. It's just that private businesses or small businesses involved in short-term rentals are collapsing. But as it was the most profitable story, it still remains the most profitable story. So there's no reason to give up on it. Of course, there are some nuances when it comes to buying such apartments, but there are also more lawyers around now, right on the spot. And we're not just sitting around either. We keep pushing our lawyers to figure out how to get around all sorts of regulations so that you can invest. And these kinds of properties too. So there are ways, and you can safely invest here as well. So the fourth and final, the last awesome strategy, which you all love, of course, I can't help but talk about flipping and new developments. And here, unfortunately, I have to say that yes, things are slowly changing. Our situation is shifting. I can't say it's collapsing, but at the very least, the easy money that used to be there, even recently, isn't quite the same anymore. What we had 3 years ago, we definitely won't have anymore, and everything points to the fact that the market today, as you've seen, even with just studios, 1 bedrooms, or 2 bedrooms, it's a bit shaky. And we can't always make money just by speculating, so to speak. For example, without doing any renovations, without any kind of improvement. So it's not exactly flipping, right? We need to distinguish. When you buy at the foundation stage and sell in concrete, but with keys and ownership, that's speculation. But if we buy at the foundation stage, get the keys, do the renovation, get ownership, and then sell, that's what we call a flip. That is, we invested some of our own resources to upgrade this apartment, this flat, or house. We made money on the added value, not on speculation, because speculation is a controversial thing right now. But it's hard to predict what will happen next with the market. So to predict where to rush, where to buy something specifically to be sure you'll make money as a speculator, I wouldn't count on that anymore. Although, of course, it's a shame and a bit disappointing. Who knows? Maybe someday some markets will return to that, and then we'll enter those markets again. But right now, that's not the case. Definitely not about Poland, but again, flipping is finally becoming real American-style flipping, where you buy something cheap, invest in it, quickly turn it around, and sell it. In other words, you create a product that's in high demand on the market. If you know how to create products that are in demand, this is your kind of story. If you don't have the time, skills, or energy for this, then it's not a profitable story for you. Because all the expenses for those same contractors could just eat up all your profit. It might eat it up, it might not, but it could. So this is a real risk. It's a business, a real business. And that's all I wanted to share with you. If you enjoyed our episode, give us a like. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, make sure to do so because we always have a lot of useful information, our latest news, and the analytics we gather and share with you. And of course, interesting offers, investment opportunities that are currently available on the market, or those we develop specifically for our investors and invite you to participate in. If you're interested in collaborating, just message us on any messenger app. You can see the phone number on the screen. Well, that's it for me. See you next time.